This video contains spoilers for Mushoku Tensei, like a lot of them, and with that said, let's start with an overview. We will take a look into Orsted's personality, his curse, his path of vengeance against Hitogami, the time loop he's in, his many powers and his relationships with important characters such as Demon God Laplace. And at the start, I have to make something very clear. Dragon God Orsted is, given his role in the story of Mushoku Tensei, arguably the single most important character, the hidden protagonist of the series, if you will. So while Rudeus is our point of view character, our gateway to the world of Mushoku Tensei, Orsted is essentially the main character. And before we get into the other, deeper lore aspects, let's start with Orsted's look and his clothing. And to describe his looks in some simple words, it's really, really badass and awesome. His serious, rigid face, his sharp yellow eyes, his white hair and winter coat, and the deep, dark voice of his in the anime are really something to behold. It just screams high power level. Fun fact, according to some speculation, Orsted's looks alone also seem to have left quite the impression on other creators, and might be, at least in part, the inspiration behind characters like King from One Punch Man or Sebastien from Overlord. So his look alone is iconic, and I'm sure Nanahoshi would agree. Now, with that said, according to Rudeus, Orsted also had lighter clothes for the desert, and for some reason I can't help but imagine him running around in a Hawaii shirt while walking through the desert. But it's likely just a lighter white coat, meant to shield the body from solar heat. Aside from this normal clothing meant to shield him from the elements, Orsted also has one other wearable item that was created by Cliff Grimoire and Zenoba. A helm of curse suppression that lessens the powerful curse that makes Orsted hated and feared by every single living creature in this world. And with that said, let's take a look at his personality. To describe the dragon god in one single word would be determined. For many thousand years, Orsted has been fighting Hitogami with unwavering commitment. He wants to see his father avenged and Hitogami defeated, and he will make this come true by any means necessary. He has put aside all doubt and anything else that would hold him back. No matter how slim the chance of winning is, he will pursue it. He is also a battle-hardened veteran who has no qualms about fighting or killing, but he does not do this out of joy or sadistic motives. So over the many years of his life, he stayed in control of his emotions. There is also a methodical discipline behind all of his action, and Orsted does not engage in petty feuds or bear long grudges against those he has defeated or those who have tried to kill him. It's a very cold and calculated approach to battle itself, all in service of his ultimate goal. And Orsted is also a capable tactician and strategist with incredible knowledge about basically every single technique in the world. It is very rare for him to encounter unfamiliar things, such as Rudeus's way of dual casting, and even then, he is able to understand and learn it almost instantly. But with all of that said, Orsted is also far more than just a fighter. He is also a great scholar with a vast knowledge about basically all things in the world. Throughout the many time loops he has been in, he memorized every single important person in the world, their locations, their combat styles, and what their goals and aspirations were. Despite all of this, and despite being in a constant war for well over 20,000 years, Orsted still has kept his personality intact. After suffering through all of his pain and sorrow and the countless loops he has been fighting through, he is still capable of incredible acts of kindness. For example, Orsted still adores and values Rudeus's children for what they are and does not see them as his mere tools. He even lets them ride on his shoulders, and in turn, Lucy, Rudy's firstborn child and his daughter with Sylphie, had mistaken the dragon god for his father. Moreover, he still protects and aids Nanahoshi. So in spite of all of his emotional hardship and his hatred for Hitogami, Orsted has not been consumed by the path of vengeance he follows, and being still able to feel kindness and joy at all would be an impossibility for all but the strongest-willed individuals. To give you an X-universe comparison, just to illustrate how insane this is, Orsted's will and strength of character are comparable to the God Emperor of Man, except that Orsted is also good with kids. But still, the many time loops have left some mark on him, as Orsted now seems very dispassionate and distant most of the time, except when he's battling the apostles of Hitogami. Lastly, Orsted's current age is actually unknown since he stopped counting which time loop he's in after 100 time loops, each lasting 200 years. So he is at least 20,000 years old, and since he has experienced hundreds of loops by his own estimation, he could also be 50,000 or 100,000 years old, making him possibly older than the God Emperor of Man. Like we are approaching Warhammer territory when talking about Orsted. So even if Rudy dies and Orsted's loop fails again, the next loop will make Orsted far deadlier. And with that, we are going to take a look at his powers. Oh boy, this is going to be a long one. Let's start with Orsted's sword styles. The Dragon God is extremely proficient in each of the three major styles, North God, Water God, and Sword God, to the level of attaining the God rank. His Water God style in particular is so incredibly powerful that he could defeat the current Rita Raya while inside her exclusion field. By the way, the exclusion field of the Water Goddess was a new technique based on the two most difficult of the 6 secret techniques the Water God style has. It was so quick and all-encompassing that even Arumanfi the Radiant was not able to evade her blade, despite his lightning-fast speed. However, Orsted not only casually walked into the field but actually deflected each of Rita Raya's blows while unarmed, killing her with a strike to the heart, executed by his own hand. This ability is actually something Eris learned from the sword god, Galfarian. It's the Sword of Light technique meant to fell enemies in a split second, and Orsted can use this power unarmed and with great ease. And once again, he also deflects sword strikes from a water goddess with his bare hands and his own variant of the battle aura, known as the Saint Dragon Battle Aura. This has to be one of the coolest named abilities in the entire history of anime. Orsted learned this technique not from the technique god Laplace, but from Urupin, another dragonkin and the 99th dragon god, who initially was considered to be a failure, having shortcomings in almost every field compared to the other dragon gods that came before him. But that's precisely why he came up with this very mana-conserving but still highly powerful aura. As mentioned, it consumes way less mana than even a normal battle aura, which is frequently employed by swordmasters to protect themselves and achieve superhuman feats, so it does not require very much mana to begin with, and it is even stronger and more mana-effective than the normal one. Once again, since Dragon God Urupin had little mana, he needed to come up with something to bridge the power gap. Necessity is said to be the mother of all inventions, and by perfecting this extremely potent technique, Orsted, who is chronically short on mana, has a very energy-efficient way of negating all but the strongest damages, to the point he can catch King-tier sword god-style users' blades with his bare hands. And even if things like Rudius's stone cannon do penetrate, the damage is superficial and negligible. Speaking of sword styles, Orsted can also summon an item named the God Blade, a sword so powerful that it can cut through Rudeus's magic battle armor, reinforced with thick, magically crafted, dense granite-like plates, without much of an issue. For reference, the sword strike of the water god, the Rita Raya, was only able to damage Rudeus's gauntlet, while Orsted cut through the arm armor and through the gauntlet without issue. The downside of this incredibly sharp and potent blade is that it needs to be summoned, and it was estimated by Rudius that it consumes around 15% of his precious mana reserves when Orsted does call it forth. So it's more of an Ultima ratio that most certainly can't be used all the time like a physical blade can. Orsted also has his Dragon God fighting style. For example, the piercing attack that impaled Rudeus is, at least in part, one of the claw techniques that he had merely combined with the Sword of Light. So he adds the Dragon Tribe's power to all of his other fighting styles as well. Orsted is also proficient at silent casting, to an even greater degree than Rudeus Greyrat, because Orsted can use spells without needing to go through voice-based casting on first use in order to unlock the silent casting. Again, Rudy needs to do so, and he can't silently cast all of his spells. For example, his healing incantations need to be said out loud, hence why he could not heal his lungs. Oh, and by the way, this was foreshadowed when Rudeus fought Eris for the first time. So, once again, Mushoku Tensei remembers small details instead of forgetting about entire fleets. Speaking of healing, Orsted is capable of using god-tier healing spells and casually healed Rudeus Greyrat, who had been on the verge of death with his heart thrown out of his body and his lungs crushed. In addition to this, he's also able to draw king-tier healing circles and create highly potent summoning circles capable of calling upon guardians that could keep Rudeus's family safe from Hitagami himself. His circles are also powerful enough to overwrite the summoning contract of Perugius Dola, the armored dragon king who's an expert in summoning magic, which is virtually unheard of. Orsted is also so proficient when it comes to healing magic that he is able to casually reattach severed limbs, such as a severed arm, like Madara Uchiha did in Naruto. Aside from all of this, he is also an extremely potent spellcaster in terms of offensive magic and has a spell that is akin to Hyper Beam, among many other powerful Emperor and God-tier spells that are basically able to terraform entire landscapes. Orsted can also cancel magic with Disturb Magic, which is a spell that releases raw mana to disrupt the forming spell in the caster's hand by scattering its own pooling mana. Orsted can also reform his own spells, even when hit with Disturb Magic himself, because his mana control is just that precise and potent. Aside from his extreme physical powers, he had taken on the main protagonist of Mushoku Tensei, who was fighting for his life and the life of his 2 wives and his children inside a magically reinforced Gundam, and he won. During the one-sided battle, he tosses this thing around like it's nothing. One unarmed strike of his was enough to not only cave in the reinforced breastplate of the armor, but also badly wound Rudius inside, knocking the entire thing into next week. Aside from his extreme power, Orsted also possesses extreme speed, to the point that he's able to dodge bullets and railgun-like projectiles. And Rudeus had great difficulty tracking Orsted's movement speed alone, and this is just his movement speed alone, not the many movement options Orsted has, for those come on top of all of this. Orsted is also able to use hypnotic magic and the voice magic of the beast folk. One shout from him was able to almost knock out Rudius in his Gundam suit, and this spell alone would utterly devastate weaker enemies, of which there are quite a lot considering how powerful Rudius had been during Volume 15 already. Orsted also has a certain resistance to toxins to the point that a wide mix of different deadly toxins Rudius acquired by drawing on Princess Ariel's connections deal so little damage that even direct skin contact is only painful enough to be barely noticed by Orsted. Even then, he asked himself whether or not he had imagined things. He is also unresponsive to aphrodisiacs, and this was something that Nanahoshi suspected to be a weakness of his, which speaks volumes about Orsted's power. The poison, not the aphrodisiac. Aside from all of this, Orsted is also incredibly intimidating. Even Rudeus felt an oppressive aura moving around, coming nearer and chasing him despite him not being affected by Orsted's curse. Also, Orsted is able to wield Kazuma's hidden power, meaning that the dragon god is extremely wealthy. Orsted can basically buy anything in the world of Mushoku Tensei, but he purely uses wealth as a tool to achieve his goals. In this loop, he also could use Nanahoshi's trade connections and ties to exercise that wealth effectively despite his curse. Moreover, Orsted possesses immense battle knowledge, and perhaps Orsted's greatest weapon is this immense, many thousand years reaching wealth of knowledge and experience. He is so proficient in combat that he can take 5 different courses of action in a single second. Hence, why he could overcome Rudeus's Eye of Foresight, and why Rudeus had such trouble focusing on Orsted, since he could be everywhere in just a second. This is simply too much even for a magic genius like Rudeus. And again, Orsted has the battle experience of at least 20,000 years under his belt, and is familiar to this world, to the point that only very few things or techniques can surprise him at all. And his high pain tolerance enables Orsted to pull through any fight without much issue. Orsted also has many items at his disposal, including an armor of fire immunity, a necklace that would tank 1 fatal hit before shattering, a legendary blade forged from the bones of a past dragon god, among many others. He also knows about teleportation networks, including the locations of the old teleporters and about teleportation circles. But still, even he had not seen or could explain the teleportation incident before. In addition to this, even without the time loop he is currently in, he's able to pull off reincarnation. In fact, Orsted has been reincarnated into the body of a human, not of a dragon tribe member, hence why he lacks some of the attributes his race normally has, such as wings. Despite this, he is incredibly powerful. In fact, while being only ranked 2nd among the great powers, he is actually the strongest man in the story of Mushoku Tensei, and he can come back on his own. Aside from all of this, Orsted is also a 3/4 deity because his father, the first dragon god, and the daughter of the true human god sired Orsted together. Which also means that basically Hitagami not only killed his father by misleading him, but he also caused the death of his mother and killed his grandpa. And now we move on to the worm gates, which Orsted uses to deal with large, predictable, destructive mana-based attacks. For example, a turbocharged nuclear explosion spell flung in a straight line by a desperate Rudeus. The front gate absorbs the mana while the back gate makes it available for the caster. However, and this is crucial, the worm gates does not allow Orsted to absorb mana and store it in his body. Instead, he can disperse mana or manipulate it into spells. But the user of this dragon technique cannot, and I stress this again, cannot refill his own, in the case of Orsted, chronically scarce mana by absorbing the mana of diverted spells. So, Orsted cannot replenish his constantly depleting mana pool using the worm gates. Additionally, these gates have the issue of not being very agile and thus rendering them less useful in high-speed battles. And finally, Orsted obtained knowledge about the anti-curse helmet that Cliff had built, so that he can replicate it in another loop. So even if he should fail this loop, he will come back yet stronger and far more knowledgeable than ever before. And with that said, let's get to his curse. Originally, it is said that Orsted suffers from 3 major curses: the curse of being hated by everyone in the world, the curse of being hidden from this world, a void spot if you will, and not being able to go all out. This is what it seems to Hitogami. And while he is indeed hated by all things in his world, the other 2 curses are not curses at all. It's his, or rather his father's, strongest technique, and one that ensures victory against Hitogami no matter what. And it ensures victory because Orsted can fail again and again until he succeeds. So it is only a question of time, of when, not if, he wins against Hitogami. His time loop starts in the winter of the year 330 and ends 200 years later. Or if he is killed, then he is automatically sent back to an unnamed forest in the year 330 again. And the best thing about all of this is that Hitogami doesn't know about this time loop. Furthermore, the time loop is also seemingly based on the surplus mana regeneration of Orsted. So basically 9.999 out of 10.000 parts of his mana go to the time loop ability, and the rest to his own mana regeneration. It's basically like an eternal form of Izanagi. So far, Orsted had stopped counting at 100 time loops, and has done the loop hundreds of times more by his own estimation. So Orsted might also be in the same age category as the Emperor of Man. He is already ancient, and as long as he stays in the loop, he is basically immortal. This ability also hides Orsted completely from Hitogami, and I mean completely. Neither his presence nor his future or past can be seen by the man-god. Having him close by also makes it impossible for Hitogami to observe anything, for example the dialogue between himself and Rudy when Rudeus decided to switch sides and betray Hitogami in favor of Orsted, stayed hidden. So Hitogami, despite being able to basically see everything, can't see Orsted, and has to observe the dragon god from other people's points of view, including his own. For example, by reading Rudeus's mind after his encounter with Orsted, Hitogami's own future sight is also useless against Orsted, because if the dragon god takes actions from Hitogami's point of view, the future changes for no apparent reason. This makes it quite difficult for Hitogami to counteract Orsted, especially with Rudeus now on his side. But this power comes with another price. As a result of Hitogami tricking the first dragon god and father of Orsted into killing the other gods and destroying entire worlds in the process, including his own, until only the world of the humans was left, in addition to being sent to the future and being able to be returned back if he should fail or die. And since he is stuck in a time loop until Hitogami perishes by his hand, Orsted, or to be more specific, his mana is cursed, as Cliff figures out in Volume 18. And this is the reason why he is cursed to be hated by every single living being in the six-sided world of Mushoku Tensei to this crippling degree. And we also have seen this curse in action even before meeting Orsted. When the people of the city of Ricaris fled from Rudyard Superdia, they did not only flee in terror because he is a so-called dead end, but also because he is cursed. And it is the same curse that Orsted has, again not to the same degree, but it's still a lesser version. This is because Laplace had the exact same curse on him, and for the exact same reason as Dragon God Orsted did. Laplace, or rather Demon Dragon God Laplace, was also sent to the world by the first Dragon God so that he could develop techniques and strategies to defeat Hitogami once Orsted arrives. But he was defeated by the Golden Knight Aldebaran and split in two. However, Laplace, or rather his demon half, once reborn, was able to pass his curse to the spears of the Supered, ridding himself of a problem Orsted still struggled with. So while Orsted never could get rid of his curse of being hated, Laplace had shown that this is possible, and the same goes for Rudyard Superdia, because his curse is now also fading. Now with all of that said, Orsted is only hated by all people in his world, and while this does not appear to be a very narrow thing, there are people in the world that are not affected by the curse, simply because they are not from this world. Rudius and his kids are outsiders and therefore are immune to it. Nanahoshi Shizuka is also completely immune to Orsted's curse and grew somewhat attached to the dragon god as well. And of course, the curse can be mitigated or lessened thanks to the anti-curse helmet. And finally, with all of that said, let's take a quick look at the major relationships the dragon god has. And we will start with the man god. Now, Orsted's relationship with the smiling sadist of Mushoku Tensei is a simple one. It's pure hatred. He feels about him like Doomslayer feels about demons, and he has very good reasons to do so. Hitogami deceived the first dragon god, Orsted's father, leading him to go on a rampage and to destroy 5 other worlds, leading to the death of the beast god, the ocean, the sky, and the demon god, before the dragon god himself perished at the hand of his 5 dragon commanders. This led to the shattering of the 6th world, that of the dragons, and the dragon god did this because someone killed his wife, the daughter of the true human god, who Hitogami likely also killed or otherwise put to death. She, the daughter of the true human deity, is also the mother of Orsted. Now, as mentioned before, Hitogami does not know that Orsted comes back time and time again. Orsted is like Scion from Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords. No matter how many times he loses, he can always try again, and sooner or later Hitogami will perish. It's like playing Dark Souls and being stuck because the way to the boss is long and dangerous, and the boss is also quite difficult. But in the end, after a long fight and countless defeats, Hitogami will eventually be defeated once. So no matter what happens, Orsted will win someday and avenge the death of his father, his mother, his grandfather, the decimation of his kin, and the end of 6 entire worlds. And fun fact, since Orsted already had met Hitogami and fought him once in the Void World but lost, Orsted also knows that it is possible to reach him. And since Hitogami and Orsted are now both sure that the dragon god would kill him, we could also assume that this battle had taken place in one of the earlier loops, where Orsted hadn't some 10,000 years of combat experience under his belt and Hitogami thought of him more as entertainment or a curiosity than as a mortal threat. But again, that's just speculation on my part. Next in line is Rudius Greyrat, and Orsted's relationship with Rudeus is a complicated one. During their first encounter, Rudeus was initially very trusting toward a character that Rudyard and Eris were deadly afraid of. But despite Rudyard telling Rudius not to move a muscle, Rudy seemingly failed a perception check and started talking to Orsted, who would have otherwise walked away. He wanted to inquire whether or not he knew something about the mana disaster, which he kind of did since Nanahoshi was with him. But he had no need to divulge such information about a girl under his protection and paint a potential target on her back. After pretending to not know anything about the mana disaster, which again is largely true, Rudeus painted a target on his front by admitting to know man-god. Afterwards, their relationship was strained, to put it mildly. Later, when he first encountered Silent 7-Star, or rather Nanahoshi, he was in full panic mode and had a breakdown, while it was technically a fall down since he then tumbled down the stairs, which just illustrates how afraid Rudy was of Orsted. What also ever so slightly deteriorated the relationship of the two was the assassination attempt on Orsted in Volume 15 on the orders of Man-God. But Orsted managed to salvage the situation by forcing Rudeus to betray Man-God, which Rudeus at that point only served anyway because Hitogami had threatened his family, and since Orsted was able to protect them personally and later by giving Rudeus a summoning circle for a strong protector, he made good on his promise. In turn, Rudeus began to work for Orsted and saved persons that would later either become a problem for Hitogami or at the very least create problems for Hitogami via their actions on the wider world down the road. Of course, Rudeus was also one of these persons since his kids were prophesized. His firstborn kid with Roxy, Lara Greyrat, to be precise, to ultimately contribute to Orsted's victory and to Hitogami's downfall. Orsted therefore had also a vested interest in keeping Rudeus and his family safe. As his superior, Orsted is casual towards Rudy, but Rudeus, who views Orsted more as his employer and boss and is therefore far more reserved towards the dragon god. But Orsted also greatly values Rudeus's honest effort to help him, and the same goes for Cliff and Zenoba. But his serious face and the dangerous look Orsted always has make him hard to read. And with that said, we move on to Rudeus' kids. I said it before, but Orsted has a will compared to the God Emperor of man. To be still capable of kindness and attachment after more than 20,000 years of fighting against his sworn enemy is nothing short of remarkable. Orsted still can easily feel love, kindness, and attachment despite his hard life. And Rudeus's firstborn child, his daughter with fits, Sylphie, even thought that Orsted was her father for a brief period of time, since the dragon god has let her ride on his mighty shoulders. And Orsted also teaches them about magic, and keeps an ever-watchful eye so that no harm may come to Rudeus' kids. So, Orsted basically acts as a second guard dog besides the holy beast Rudeus summoned. And of course Rudeus's firstborn daughter with his second wife Roxy is destined to save the world. Hence why the holy beast is so attached and attentive to her, making Rudeus's daughter and family also important to Orsted's war goal. Now despite this, Orsted does not view these kids as disposable tools, but as humans worthy of kindness and joy. After noticing that mana was gathering in the Fitoa region of the kingdom of Asura, the dragon god investigated this anomaly, leading him to find a person from another world. And Orsted's first encounter with Nanahoshi was probably a very positive one. Nanahoshi, not being subject to his curse, was likely a very pleasant surprise to him, so for perhaps the first time in many thousands of years, he was not rejected or ostracized, but could have a normal conversation with another unknown person. And I would say that Nanahoshi found a friend, or at least an ally, in Orsted. The dragon god was also very protective of her, in part because he had gained an underling who could interact with others on his behalf, which was useful, but he also genuinely cared about Nanahoshi's well-being, meaning that in spite of being so focused on destroying Hitagami for betraying and killing his father and ending his world, thus decimating his species, he was able to make interpersonal connections, which is remarkable. He also acted very sweet towards her, for example, carrying her on his back when she was too tired to walk anymore after traveling through the deserts of the Begarit continent, instead of being disappointed or mad. So Orsted still has a good heart. Also, he gave her the 2 magic barrier rings, in order to keep the otherwise completely defenseless Nanahoshi safe. After the events of Volume 15, where Nanahoshi betrayed Orsted without him giving her any reason to do so, Orsted still forgave Nanahoshi after Rudeus pleaded for her innocence, and told him that it was actually he himself who made her do it, and that she protested against attacking Orsted. Still, this must have hurt to be betrayed by Nanahoshi despite her not being subject to his curse. However, Orsted likely attributed Nanahoshi's betrayal to Rudeus being influenced by Hitagami at that time. And finally, we take a look at Orsted's stepbrother, Laplace. Like Orsted, demon dragon god Laplace was sent to the human world, and Laplace's task was to develop all sorts of battle skills, techniques, and spells, so that once Orsted arrives, Laplace could teach Orsted his techniques and ensure that he has the upper hand against Hitagami when they fight. So he and Orsted are not only stepbrothers, since Laplace had been adopted by the first dragon god, but they were allies, or at least used to be when Laplace had been whole. In addition to all of these techniques, Laplace also created the 7 Great Power System, and placed himself at the very top to encourage challengers. He wanted to fight strong opponents in order to learn, understand, adapt, and improve upon their techniques as well. Now you might ask what it has taken to split a demon dragon god into 2, and the answer is as shocking as you might have expected. One of the 7 great powers, or the fighting god in power, or rather overpowered armor. Interestingly, the golden armor he had worn was created by Laplace himself. It was his greatest triumph and his greatest failure. Just like the spears of the Sperdia, the armor itself was also cursed, and it had furthermore developed a will of its own, creating a powerful drive to attack and do battle, essentially turning its wearer into a berserker. Only with this item was the fighting god, Aldebaran the Golden Knight, or rather Badigadi, able to split Laplace. And he even survived all of this, or rather he came back from the dead, as Bodigadi could resurrect himself. As for the reason why Bodigadi had even sought to stop demon dragon god Laplace, it was because man god appeared in his dreams and told Bodigadi that the life of his fiancée, Kishirika Kishirisu, was in mortal danger if he did not stop demon dragon god Laplace. And he actually succeeded. The defeat of the demon dragon god Laplace was so enormous that not only did both of his halves lose part of their memory and part of their skill, but the demon half lost even his most treasured goal. Instead of being single-mindedly focused on destroying the man god, he now was focused on destroying man, because he had forgotten the last part of his enemy's name, while the other half trains and masters all sorts of techniques in order to defeat God. So much to the delight of Hitogami, demon god Laplace was attacking the humans, betraying the Superds and causing havoc. And despite not being able to use battle aura in his divided form, and despite being bereft of all of his martial prowess, he still was monstrously strong, and his death and his way of reincarnation were also the reasons why Rudeus had such a huge mana pool. Laplace's influence would cause the birth of very peculiar children who inherit aspects of him. For example, Sylphiette had inherited an aptitude for magic and his green hair, while Rudeus inherited his large mana pool. Now this last one had been such a potent boon that the fragile soul of the infant could never form due to Laplace's oppressive mana aspect. Much like Hitogami can't view areas with dense mana concentration, the mana of Laplace's power shattered the infant's soul, which would normally have caused a stillbirth. But this already formed empty body was the perfect vessel for the soul of the protagonist of Mushoku Tensei, Rudeus Greyrat, to inhabit. Now ultimately, despite Man-God's best efforts, and despite splitting Laplace and his memory into two, and despite changing the place and time where Laplace would reincarnate, which was troublesome for Orsted because he needed to kill him, preferably by strangling him in his crib in order to get to Hitogami afterward, Hitogami also had ultimately failed. The technique god Laplace survived and remembered his enemy too well, and he still created the 7-power ranking system and developed many fighting techniques in order to defeat God. And with Rudeus and his other allies at his side, Orsted, now being skilled or at least familiar with and knowledgeable about basically every single spell, item, power, technique, or sword school, makes the dragon god strong enough to defeat the man god. The only thing Orsted needs to do is get to the boss arena. As soon as this happens, doom music starts playing.